At first, I thought it was kind of a joke. I was like, how can you really do anything with 4 needles, right? Are you going to really, coming from Wang Ju-Yi's approach, and even though those treatments in applied channel theory, they're usually very concise, 8, 10 needles, something like that. So we're not talking about big 20 needle treatments or anything, but at the same time, to like reduce everything to 4 needles, I thought was a little absurd.
I'm Michael Max, and this is Geological, the podcast that curates East Asian medicine and methods through the power of conversation. Acupuncture is full of resonant relationships, reflective correspondences, holographic microsystems, and axioms from the classics. All of these give the practitioner a perspective that can be useful for seeing into the constellation of a patient's problem and, more importantly, what to do about it. One of the more useful correspondences that I've come across is the way that Saam acupuncture pairs the yin-yang organs. As all acupuncturists know, the usual yin-yang pairings are the lung and large intestine, spleen and stomach, kidney and urinary bladder, and so on and so forth. This is the basic Chinese medicine that we all learned in our first few weeks of school. We also learned about the great channel pairs, for example, the foot Shaoyin kidney being paired to the hand Shaoyin heart, or the foot Taiyang urinary bladder being contiguous with the hand Taiyang small intestine. Both of these are helpful ways of looking at organ relationships. I want to share with you something about the Saam pairings because I found it to be really helpful in clinic. And once you grasp the basics, you'll not be able to unsee the hidden harmonies that have been right in front of your eyes, but you've probably overlooked. These organ pairings powerfully blend together the 5-phase energetics of the wind of wood, heat of fire, dampness of earth, dryness of metal, and cold water, with the 6 qi correspondences of Taiyang cold, Yangming dryness, Xiaoyang fire, Tai-yin dampness, Xiao-yin heat, and Zhui-yin wind. When you think about it, these, along with the permutations of yin and yang, and the idea of interior-exterior and deficiency-excess, are the basic building blocks of Chinese medicine. Let's look at a few channels to give you a feel for what I'm talking about. Let's begin with the spleen. In TCM, we learn the spleen does not like dampness. But when you look at it as being the earth element, which is associated with dampness, and that it is a tie-in organ, and tie-in that also is associated with damp, well, then it's clear that the spleen is an organ of dampness. I know, we learned in school the spleen likes dryness, and we'll get into dryness here in a moment. But for now, we're looking at how it is that the spleen is naturally damp. Looking through the 6 qi, we see that Tai-in includes dampness, and the earth phase likewise infers dampness. So the Tai-in, earth, spleen, it's clearly an organ involved with adding moisture to the body. What would balance out the dampness of the spleen? Well, that would be the Yangming dryness of the dry metal large intestine. Now, I know what you're thinking, but the paired yin organ of the large intestine is the lung. And yes, that's true if you're only looking at metal, as both lung and large intestine are considered metal organs. But, and this is important, if you look at the full name of an organ or channel, let's say lung, since we're talking about it right now, it would be the hand tie-in metal lung. So the lung is a mixture of tie-in damp and metal dry. What would be its opposite? That would be the foot dry Yangming and damp earth stomach. A little mind-bending, yes? Notice how these pairings combine hand and foot channels, and they perfectly mirror each other's 5-phase and 6 environmental qi characteristics. Let's do one more to be sure you have the hang of this. The heat of the hand, Xiao Yin, hot, fire, heart, is balanced by the foot, cold, Taiyang, cold water of the urinary bladder. So, a quick review. The lung is paired with the stomach. The spleen balances the large intestine, and the hot heart is paired with the ultra-cold urinary bladder. I think you get the idea, and you can see how the kidney and small intestine share that same mix of hot and cold in the same way that the lung and the stomach share a mixture of dampness and dryness. You can take this idea and work the rest of these channels out on your own. I think you'll find it a worthwhile investigation. Worried about how to keep track of the character of each of the channels? It's actually quite simple if you remember to think of the channels with their full and complete name. Instead of simply thinking of a channel with the shorthand of the organ name, use its full name. For example, the hand tie-in metal lung. That tells you everything you need to know about it in terms of character and correspondence. It's a pretty insightful innovation that has come down through the Saam tradition, and while there is plenty written about Saam in Korean, as well as a verbal monastic tradition, there's precious little that's been written in English. That is about to change, as Phil Suger and Michael Brown are about to publish their translation of a book on Saam acupuncture. As with most translation projects, it's a labor of love that has spanned the course of more than a few years. Phil joined us for the 2024 Saam Chautauqua and shared some of the curious history of Saam from this translation that he's been working on. You can find that in the book Saam Acupuncture, Perspectives and Practice, which is a work of thematic summaries from the 2024 Saam Chautauqua. It's over on the big river of books along with presentations from the other 14 presenters. And you'll also find that thematic summary on the show notes page as well. In this conversation with Philip and Michael, we get into the details of what they've been working on. A note on this conversation, originally, Philip and Michael, they thought they would have this work completed in the fall of 2024. But as with many translation projects, there's a lot of work that you didn't expect that shows up at the end. So this conversation is from the summer of 2024, but it's as timeless as acupuncture itself. If you're a fan of Saam acupuncture, you're going to love this conversation. And if you're not familiar with Saam, this conversation, it's a great introduction. We'll get into it right after this. Qiological Conversations come to you through the generous support of our sponsors and members. You have clinic challenges? Our sponsors have solutions. This month, Mayway Herbs focuses on formulas and resources for women's health. Have you ever wondered about the fast and AcuFast? Listen in and find out. And later in the show, Jane helps you to organize the modern acupuncture practice, and Blue Poppy reminds us that there's no such thing as a small detail. Do be sure to visit the sponsors page on the Qiological website to take advantage of all the special offers our terrific sponsors have for listeners of the podcast.
Hi folks, I'm Yvonne Lau, president of Mayway Herbs. During the lovely month of May, we're happily focusing on women's health. You can enjoy new articles and our Chinese Medicine Matters podcast on topics including menopause and perimenopause, optimizing fertility, and how to differentiate between formulas that tonify blood and warm the uterus. We'll also explore more complex presentations, like hyperemesis, with practical, pattern-based insights to support your clinical decision-making. And check out our helpful comparison charts and discussions on Mayway.com to aid in optimal formula selection. This month, clinicians can enjoy special savings on formulas that support blood, fertility, and menstrual health. Since 1969, Mayway Herbs has supported practitioners and their patients with high-quality herbal products and trusted educational resources. So visit Mayway.com to learn more. Have a wonderful spring season, and thanks for supporting real Chinese medicine.
A busy acupuncturist knows that saving time is a big win. Have you heard about AcuFast earth-friendly needles? The fast in AcuFast isn't just marketing, it's what happens once you learn the system. And that takes about 30 minutes to retrain your muscle memory and reorganize your workspace. But after that, you start saving time every single day. This is John Stan, inventor of the AcuFast needling system. At a recent conference, a practitioner told me he used to spend about 6 minutes per patient opening needle packs and inserting needles. With AcuFast, he said, that dropped to 3 minutes. Yep, he was that kind of busy. In his clinic, that added up to an extra hour every day. Just think about that. Enough time to treat another patient, catch up on charting, or simply finish earlier. That's why it's called AcuFast. It's just faster. And with earth-friendly packaging, you're reducing waste at the same time. Less waste, more time. AcuFast, faster for you and lighter on the planet. Visit acufastneedles.com to learn more.
Philip Suger, Michael Brown, welcome to Geological.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us.
Yes, I'm looking forward to this. You guys are doing a book. Why on earth would anybody want to do a book? Books are a lot of work. Does anybody even read books anymore?
Not many, really not many.
And yet...
I would just say probably Chinese medicine is one of, I think, the few places that people still buy books. Not everyone, but I still think a fair few people still get excited for new releases and new books.
I hope so. I think books are magical, so I kind of have a thing for them.
Yeah, with Toby's release of his new book, the first really clinical introduction to Saam in English, I got really excited for that. I was like counting down the days to order it from Amazon.
Yes. So, Philip, I want to start with you because you're kind of the main character who's pulling this book together. Before we talk about Saam, you've spent a fair amount of time in Asia. You've spent time with other kinds of acupuncture traditions. I mean, you had the good fortune to study with Dr. Wang Ju-Yi in Beijing, and you spent time, was it in Nanjing? I mean, you've been exposed, I suspect, to a lot of acupuncture in your time living overseas. What I'd like to do is start with what your acupuncture background looks like in terms of education and practice, and then what brought you around to this Saam stuff, because at the moment, man, you're in it with both feet.
Sure. Yeah, it's a bit of a story, but the funny thing is that you and I, Michael, we have a lot of the same teachers. We, I guess, tend to gravitate towards the same kind of people. We've almost met a number of different times in China and else places, but it never ended up happening. So I guess the first time we're really meeting is digitally here. But when I first went to China, I guess for an extended period of time, in 2010, I just knew that I wanted to go there. I wanted to get as immersed in the medicine as possible. And out of good fortune, I was talking to this German student at a sushi restaurant in Beijing one day, and he was telling me all about Wang Ju-Yi, right? So I never knew who Wang Ju-Yi was before this, but he kept on talking about him, how he was studying with him and how amazing he was. And of course, I got really interested, and he said, "Oh, I asked if I could go study with him." He said, "Wait, just read the book first," right? This was 2010, so the book had already been out for about 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I ordered the book, and then I instantly fell in love. I still think to this day that Applied Channel Theory in Chinese Medicine is the best book on acupuncture in English or Chinese or Korean or Japanese, whatever. It's such a phenomenal book. And that was my really first in-depth look at a system. And I feel very lucky that I got to do that because I didn't really have to go through the drudges of sort of the basic TCM approach that we learn in school. And sort of I got right into that magical world of channel palpation and taking a really deep look at how the points work, how the channels work. And so I became very invested into that tradition, studying with Dr. Wang for a little bit, doing my doctoral thesis on that topic eventually, and just being really ingrained in that approach and how wonderful it is. It is a really great approach.
Now, what is it that makes it so great for you? What is it that, I hear you talk about it, and you do. You sound like you're in love with it. It's like, this is amazing. It's very comprehensive in some way. What is it about Dr. Wang's work that you found so helpful?
Wang Ju-Yi, he, I'm certain that he is one of the modern geniuses of Chinese medicine. He, obviously committed his whole life to Chinese medicine and acupuncture. And, the stories of him, staying up late at night, every night, just poring over classical medical texts on a little table while his family was sleeping, right? He was just on another level of understanding the classics and the medicine. And, it's easy to be enchanted by his writings and his concepts and theories. What really gravitated me towards applied channel theory was the palpation, the objective manner of the style, right? The fact that you can actually palpate the channels and feel the channels themselves weren't this abstract idea that some people have, right? These channels, they're just these lines on your body that people came up with. They're actual physical structures that you can palpate and feel. And you can actually feel disease being generated in the body, and you can actually see it also be resolved when proper treatment is applied. So I just thought it was such a great way to go about using acupuncture.
For sure. Look, acupuncture can be kind of tricky. Is anything going on? Are we getting traction? Am I doing anything? And being able to get instant palpatory feedback, that's really helpful.
For sure, right? You could have 10 or 5 different practitioners look at the same patient, and right, they could all feel the pulse and whatnot, and they could listen to the symptoms and signs, and they could give you a number of different possibilities of what was going on. But adding that additional palpation of the channels, you could really sort of narrow it down to, okay, this is mainly, a tie-in spleen issue, whatever that's going on, rather than, a heart qi deficiency, for example.
Yeah, it's cool. Now,
go
ahead, Michael.
In Wang Ju-Yi's case study book, and one of the things that I do like to do is to look at various older acupuncturists and look at actually how they write their case studies and see how they diagnose. One of the interesting things about Wang Ju-Yi in his book is that he'll often just put like abnormal channel changes, maybe in Tai Yin or spleen Tai Yin or liver Jue Yin, and then he says the disease is in the spleen Tai Yin or the liver Jue Yin or something like that. He's not really saying is there like deficiency or excess or these other things like that. He would definitely be thinking about that, but when it comes to him writing a diagnosis and a case study, it's just it seems like his focus is really about the qi transformation within those kind of 6 channels, or the Lu Jing, right? That you can then break up into 12. And I obviously know that Phil was there to study with him, and I only have experiences through his books. And, we were talking about how great books are, and that's a kind of like, I'll never have an opportunity to study with Wang Ju-Yi personally, but, I'm very lucky that he wrote his books so diligently, like Phil said, and maybe Phil can kind of like talk a little bit about that, maybe that like when he's talking about the treatment, but even about the diagnostic idea, because we get so fixated in the West about the almost like the Zhang Fu diagnostic perimeters where, something needs to be excess, something needs to be hot, something needs to be cold, something needs to be deficient, so forth. Like, what do you think about that, Phil?
So yeah, the idea of placing the channels first is really important. It's right. The idea of getting to know the channels is so crucial to practicing acupuncture, right? We have the famous quote in the Zhenjiu Dachang that right, it's better to forget the points rather than forgetting the channels, right? Being able to understand the qi transformation that takes into the channels provides us with a lot more to work on than just regular old, zangfu bianzheng, organ differentiation, right? So it opens this new perspective that we can use in the clinic. And I think that's, really important.
Yeah, I certainly have found it in my own clinical experience that with the usual TCM that we learn in school, it's a very heady enterprise. It's a very intellectual enterprise. Some of that appeals to me. I like using my head. So it appeals to me a bit. But as a practitioner, I found it often difficult because I wasn't great with that kind of diagnosis. Being able to go to the channels, Michael, like you were just talking about, Wang Ju-Yi would palpate, you go, could be Tai-yin spleen, could be Dre-yin liver. It's like I'm homing in on it. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know the rough ballpark that it's in. So I'm going to start there. Not unlike Dr. Huang's ideas with formula families. You can look at a person's symptoms, their constitution, the kind of formula that might be right for them, and now you've got a ballpark that you can work in. And being able to, clinic is tricky, and anything can be anything. So to be able to narrow things down quickly and effectively is super helpful.
Yeah, for sure.
I was going to say one interesting thing is, and I recall this was a discussion that I think was having with Will Kervils and another good friend Ivan, was that he was talking about this famous doctor called Lo Shu Kan, who is a very famous Jingfeng doctor who Will has been working on translating his cases and his medical theories. And so hopefully they'll be out in the next couple of months. But he says that his approach was that he would decide what he wanted to do based on what he would see, and then he would kind of work the diagnosis backwards. At least I think I'm hoping that I'm quoting Will correctly. But that's another way that you can do it. Sometimes it's like you think you know what you need to do, and then it's like, okay, I'll base my diagnosis on what I need to do.
You're saying working more intuitively? Like, I got a hit. I think it's this. I'm going to go down that road and see what it is?
I wouldn't say intuitively. It's like you see someone has a formula pattern. It's just like, okay, this person might be like a Guizhi tongue or Xiaotaihu tongue kind of pattern. And then you already have your pattern before you have your diagnosis. And then it's kind of like, well, so you're kind of seeing what you're going to do. And then your diagnosis just kind of like, you've done what you've done. You just kind of slot your diagnosis in after you've done what you've done as well. As long as the person's hopefully getting better. But there's also, like, Will kind of mentioned that little bit of an approach to diagnosing as well. And I think that's kind of one of the very interesting things in Chinese medicine is the more you look at various doctors' case histories, the more that you see that, as long as you, I think, study well and you have, you kind of hopefully try to read as many of the classics, is that there's flexibility within a diagnostic and treatment approach.
Yeah, for sure. What you were sort of talking about, that Jingfang approach, the Jingfang, Fang Zheng Xiangying, the sort of formula pattern differentiation, as Michael was also mentioning, that's very Huang-esque. And that's sort of where I went after, doing my master's and then going back to Nanjing and studying with Huang is actually through your book, Michael, that I guess I got my first taste of Huang's perspective. I know that you wrote the translation of the 10 Formula Families book, one of his better books, and it was really helpful before I went there and started to study with him. And yeah, when you use this Jingfang, Fangzheng Xiangying approach, right, it does sort of simplify things, right? It sort of cuts out the middleman in a sense where, very Yoshimasu Todo-esque, where you're trying to keep things as objective as possible. You don't want to sort of wander off into abstract la la land, which can be fun and enjoyable at times, but at the same time, it can also lead us to the pitfall of forgetting the patient in front of us, forgetting their objective signs, and right, using the experience and the expertise of these masters of the past who help sort of discern these certain patterns that people present with disease. It's a nice framework to build your practice off of. Your herbal formulas can be built off the experts, standing on top of the shoulders of those giants.
Yes. Well, this kind of tees us up for talking about something that I initially wanted to have a conversation with you guys about, which is a book that you guys are working on Saam acupuncture. Saam is another one of these incredibly, I'm going to say, objective systems that can give you some insights that make clinical work, I don't know if I'd say it's easy, but it's a really good handle that can get you a lot of leverage pretty quickly. And the treatment itself has enough firepower that if you don't have your diagnosis dialed in, you can cause some mischief. So it's a great system. My experience with Saam until I ran into Toby Daly is I'd hear about it in different places, but there really wasn't anything I could get my hands on that I found very helpful. Phil, tell us a little bit about what brought you to Saam, and then I want to hear about like how you get to doing a book, because look, a book's a lot of work. And thank you for doing it, because it's usually really helpful. So whatever got you started on this?
So the funny story that I like to tell my students, or when I like to talk about Saam, is that I remember when studying for the board exams, right? We all cover Korean 4 needle in school because, right, it's going to be on the board exams. And I specifically remember, because we cover it so superficially in such a poor manner, that I was at this point, even though I knew like there would be a question or two on the exam, that I was like, I'm going to just throw these questions away. I'm not even going to spend the time to sort of figure out what they're talking about, because it's so convoluted and doesn't make sense. And I think I did have like one question on my board exam, and I probably got it wrong. But then in 2019, 2020, there was a lot of buzz starting around Saam acupuncture, with Toby Daly finally starting to teach his teacher's tradition. I heard Phil Settles and some other friends that were talking about this style. And at first, I thought it was kind of a joke. I was like, how can you really do anything with 4 needles, right?
Right.
Are you going to really, coming from Wang Ju-Yi's approach, and even though those treatments in applied channel theory, they're usually very concise, 8, 10 needles, something like that. So we're not talking about big 20 needle treatments or anything, but at the same time, to like reduce everything to 4 needles, I thought was a little absurd. But everybody was talking about how great it was, and that it's completely based on classical thought and context. And I needed some CEUs, and so I decided to just hop on to qiological.com and order the introduction class. I think was in Missouri in 2019, something like that.
Yeah, it was.
And it was interesting. I thought it was very interesting. I thought what Toby was talking about was useful and classically based. And I put it in my back pocket for the most part. I put it in my back pocket where I would use it every once in a while. I was at a point in my practice where I dealt with the difficult issue of having patients who would get better temporarily, but they would always slide back to their pathological state. And I couldn't figure it out why. I was palpating the channels. I was coming up with a good diagnosis. They responded to the treatment. Why wasn't it sticking? And I thought a lot of it had to do with people's personalities, people's sort of constitution, in a sense, that their body when ill, had this tendency to present with these issues. And I was trying to find a way how to address that with acupuncture, right? Herbs are great and all, but a lot of times patients aren't so compliant, or they don't want to take herbs, or they're on a bunch of medication. So we're often left with acupuncture. And then I just sort of slowly started to use Saam acupuncture more and more. I still had to look at the chart in the beginning and like, okay, how can I tonify the liver and, do that. But I would start to see these really miraculous results. And I think that's the addicting part of Saam. It's the thing that gets you caught into the style is you have these really amazing treatments where people will respond quite dramatically to these 4 needles. Now, that doesn't happen all the time, unfortunately, but it does happen. And then you're enticed and say, how can I do this again? Like, how can I repeat this?
Right. And just 4 needles.
Right. With just 4 needles.
Just 4 needles.
And so over the years, I started incorporating it more and more. And then when I was practicing, my true conversion story happened in California, where I was studying with Toby, right? I was in Northern California. So, he was there. So I was like, might as well study with him. So I got to know Toby and talk to him a lot. And, he's a really great guy, very helpful. And then I got to this point where I was treating this one patient, this older woman, or middle-aged older woman, who had really bad neck pain, and for a lot of physical issues, I would often rely on sort of channel theory and sort of just trigger needling and all things like that, and it's generally helpful. But this woman, she wouldn't get as good as I hoped she would, and then I just, hey, let's try some Saam on her, and then after that treatment, she said, "Oh, wow, that treatment was more beneficial than all the other treatments you've done previously." And I was like, "Oh, geez." So, there might be something really here where I was like, okay, I think, I'm studying with Toby already. I think I've got to, put my shingle behind Saam acupuncture and just really fully commit to it. So that's the style that I now practice primarily.
When running an acupuncture practice, treating patients is one part of the job, and managing your clinic is the other. That's why I rely on Jane. When I was first starting out, I had no idea about the office management structure I would need to support my acupuncture practice. It was not something taught in school, and let's face it, when I started my practice, life was simpler. Today's patients expect the offices of their healthcare practitioners to be automated, and as practitioners, we demand an office support system that fits our practice like a finely crafted tool, which is exactly what Jane does. Scheduling, charting, automated reminders to patients, payment processing, and even assistance writing clinic notes with AI Scribe are part of the kit. And for me, the peace of mind that comes with knowing that everything is working properly is why I'm delighted to have Jane handle all my office management. See how Jane can help you too by visiting jane.app/demo. Sign up for Jane and use the code CHIOLOGICAL to get a 1-month grace period on your new Jane account. Now, do you combine some channel palpation with it? Are there ways that you've taken all the things that you've done before that were helpful and I don't know if I should say match them in, but have they come along in some way?
Right. So historically, there's also this tradition of sort of taking other ideas in outside of Saam and sort of compressing it in. So a number of different practitioners in Korea have used, emphasized more on pulse, more on looking at, the constitution of the people, the body types of the people that's sort of famous in Korea. And so yes, even in the book that we're translating, the classical text of Saam acupuncture, there's mention in Ji-san's case studies book that he was using the palpatory techniques from the Lingshu, from the spiritual pivot that are described in there, that's sort of the basis of applied channel theory, that he was using those to come up with his diagnoses. And if you look at some of his case studies, right, he was definitely looking at the channels and looking at certain aspects of the channels to come to his conclusions.
Did he also? I'm pretty sure he also mentioned some like body type constitutions as well. He also, I think, found it interesting in his case studies that he would also, not always, I mean, the case studies are often quite short, but he would also look at the patient's history, or how do you say, like the duration or the chronic nature of some of the diseases, where he would kind of talk about them. He would also talk about diseases that would come and go or relapse as well, or even kind of where he initially thought this was this type of disease, the person doesn't get better, and he's like, oh, I saw this, and that made me think of, and I changed my treatment to this, and then they got better. So it's the case studies I thought were very interesting, quite difficult to work on some of them, but it's very rare, I think, to have, especially in more kind of classical or traditional literature, have a manual of practice paired with a case study book. That is what I think makes this text very unique.
Now,
Right.
How did you guys come across this text?
Well, when I started to become really immersed in Saam and really obsessed about it, right, I figured, hey, I speak Chinese. Most of the time, I have access to most resources available in East Asian medicine. So I looked up on Taobao and Jingdong to look for Saam acupuncture books that might have been translated into Chinese or were in Chinese originally. To my surprise, there was pretty much nothing, right? Anybody who's familiar with going on those websites and looking up Chinese books, there's thousands and thousands and thousands of books on Chinese medicine. But for whatever reason, there was nothing available for Saam acupuncture.
No, it's weird, isn't it?
Really weird.
Yes.
I looked and looked and looked, and it ended up, I ended up finding a few little sort of master theses that were available online that I purchased a few copies of people's sort of research on Saam acupuncture and some of the translations of the texts. And so I actually started with that. I started with this master's thesis where this one Korean student, actually, I think he was at the Beijing University of Chinese Medicine at the same time as I was. So it's kind of crazy that I might have actually passed him in the hallways without have never really realized that. But he wrote his master thesis on, creating the first copy of Saam's original text and Jisan's original text in simplified Chinese, and then doing some analysis on the case study texts. So I that was really the only thing I could find. There really wasn't anything available in Chinese language, which was really weird. What Michael and I found eventually was that, these original texts, right? So to give the audience a background, right? So we have two main texts. They were originally thought to be one text, but they were actually by two different authors. So the original text by our mythical figure Saam, right? We don't know if he's a real person or not. But he is supposedly this monk who meditated in a cave for 13 years and came up with these medical ideas. Him or his students wrote a treatise on Saam acupuncture, from somewhere between 1644 and 1742. After that time period, another individual named Jisan took that information and wrote case studies about, he used that method from Saam, and he wrote a number of case studies about it. And then those two texts were eventually put together, which led to people thinking, oh, it's just one author, but in reality, they were two separate people.
So Jisan was some sort of savant practitioner, evidently, who came across this, and his way of sharing the material was to do it through case study.
Right. He actually contributed a lot. So I guess the big thing that really hit me when we first started looking at this text was that it's not very different, but it's definitely different from how we practice Saam today. They didn't really talk about the counterbalance pairs, right? Not everything were just those, supplementing and draining prescriptions, but it's actually more in lines with other classical acupuncture texts, or even you could think about it like the Jingui Yaolu, where you have these disease chapters, right? You have, each chapter is based on a certain disease. Here are some acupuncture prescriptions, and that's how you go about treating it. He does provide a little bit of theory, but it's fairly limited. It's actually not until we get to Jisan, who sort of looked at all those prescriptions and sort of organized them and rationalized them to say, hey, this prescription is supplementing the liver. This prescription is draining the lung, right? So he was the actual one who sort of determined these categories of supplementing and draining prescriptions. So we actually owe that to him. And then he, further built on the theory, and then wrote those 100+ case studies that are in our book.
So the original text didn't lay out these counterbalances. It was more about, here's a problem, here's how it's treated.
Right.
And then it was later Jisan looking at it and going, here's the patterns of what he was doing.
It's not that simple, though. So Jisan, this is my big problem now, is that Jisan, he created those prescriptions for supplementing and draining and whatnot. But then from that time period to now, someone else created these counterbalance pairs. This idea came later, but we don't know exactly who came up with that idea. And that's been sort of what I've been trying to find out for the past couple of years, is who that person was. But I haven't figured that out because, right, to how we practice Saam now, the counterbalance pairs are key to everything that we do.
It's one of the most brilliant innovations that I've run into in Chinese
It is.
medicine. It's been weird to me that these would not show up in the usual kinds of classics, because
Exactly.
it's so effective. And, if you look at the relationship of the organs in each, I'm going to call it the triads of the Chinese clock. We've got the great tie-in channels, spleen and lung. You've got the lung and large intestine, yin-yang pairing. And we know these all make sense. But nobody talked about lung and stomach. But if you look at the Zhu clock, it's like, well, it's actually an obvious pairing.
It is. So you have this development that takes place in channel theory. So originally with the Huangdi Neijing, right, with Ling Shu, you have the original pairings, the Biaoli and Tongming pairings of the internal external and the same name pairings, right? So our lung and large intestines, our lung and spleens, right? The internal external and same names. So that was already established way back when. It's not until Sun Simiao in the Tang Dynasty that we start having another category called what we can call same movement, where we're sort of looking at the relationship between organs in between different circuits, right? Each circuit is the sort of the four organs in a family of the trajectory of the channels as it goes up from the hand to the head to the from the chest to the hand, to the hand to the head, to the head to the foot, to the foot to the chest again, right? That's one circuit. So that happens 3 times. So there's 3 circuits. So in each of those circuits, the organs are very closely related to each other. So even way back when, like you were talking about, they knew that the lung and large intestine had a strong relationship with each other. They knew that the spleen and lung had a strong relationship with each other. But then there was that missing puzzle piece, right? You had the lung and the stomach, right? Nobody talked about that relationship until, something like 1800 years later, where it's kind of crazy to think about because of how easily the puzzle pieces fit together, where you take the 5 element and the 6 chi together and sort of look at how they interrelate to each other within each circuit. And then you have these opposites that form, these counterbalance pairs that form, that has become the basis of our modern approach to Saam acupuncture.
Yeah, it's still so strange to me that it wasn't seen or talked about until then, because maybe it's just like anything else. Once you know it and once you see it, you can't unsee it.
Right.
But still, it seemed like you were saying, we have these 4 channels, 3 circuits. It's right there in front of us. It's been right there in front of practitioners for a long time. How it got missed, I don't know.
For sure, yeah, and we still don't know who came up with the idea. That's the crazy part. There's this Korean genius out there, some couple hundred years ago, who figured this out, and we don't even know his name. We just sort of use his approach today.
I think there's kind of, especially when you're looking at Chinese texts and you're trying to source an idea, it can be extremely frustrating when you can't find the, how do you say, like the person who came up with something as well. You just know it just starts appearing, and you're like, well, who came up with that? How, and you look everywhere, and you just find dead end after dead end, and it's very hard to figure out sometimes where, that when you're reading Chinese text, sometimes the other things that they'll do is they might quote someone, but they're not telling you that they're quoting someone as well. You're just expected to know that they're quoting. So, when we've been working on this text, we've been trying to include supplementing footnotes so people can know that when authors are quoting another person or something like that. So you can also see, for example, these 2 guys who wrote these Saam books were also very well read generally as well. And even though, they were in what we might call Korea now, I'm not actually sure. It might have been like one of the Chosun dynasties or something like that. I'm not sure what one of the dynasties in Korea.
Yeah, they're in the Chosun dynasty, yeah.
Yep. That they still obviously have access to a lot of good Chinese medical works, which is interesting, you know?
Yeah, so it is weird, right? I think it's really important to look at the history of Chinese medicine. You know, for example, with the upcoming Chautauqua, I'm looking at the history and development of Saam acupuncture coming this summer. Everybody sign up and register. And right, to understand these ideas in Chinese medicine, I know it's, cool to just focus on treatment and see the actual results, but to get a better understanding, we really do have to return to the source. We really have to unfold the pages of time to really figure out, where did these ideas come from, why do they make sense, and how we can use them in the clinic. Right. I think that's really important. That's why, things like translating, Michael's already translated a number of books. Purple Cloud Publishing is a really great venue right now, where they're giving a lot of opportunities to translators to take these old books and bring them in, make them available to an English audience for the first time. So I think this will only help the Western Chinese medical community in getting a better and better understanding of, how Chinese medicine works.
Some of the original treatments and ideas in the Saam book, you said that they're not doing it the same way that we would do it today. So can you give us a little preview? What were they doing?
Yeah, sure.
What did a treatment look like with Monk Saam?
Mm-hmm.
What was he doing?
Yeah, it's surprising. So the treatments do tend to have only 4 points, but that's not always the case, right? So this idea that the treatment should only be amount to 4 points, right? Because back then they couldn't just order off of Lhasa OMS a whole bunch of needles and just use them all willy-nilly. They only had a limited supply. And it actually comes from the Dongyi Baojian, very important Korean medical text that was written by Ho Jun, right? One of the very important people in Korean medicine.
Can I just say, interestingly, I'm pretty sure that text was translated by Koreans. The whole thing of it.
It was translated by the government, the Korean government, actually. So there's like an online resource where you can look at the text in English, Chinese, and Korean. So whatever your flavor is, you can look at it and you can compare different parts of the text. So that's really useful.
And this is a book on traditional Korean medicine?
So, right, it was the Koreans giving Chinese medicine their own flavor, right? The Japanese have done some similar things. I think it's called the Shinifang. I forget the exact name, but
they had the Huang Huang Yishui sort of thing as well.
Right. Anyways, the idea comes from that book. It comes from the book, and it states that, an acupuncture treatment should not exceed 4 needles. That was the idea. So they took this concept and, Saam applied it to his approach, where in general, he doesn't usually use more than 4 needles. Sometimes he does, sometimes he uses less. But a lot of the times you'll see him using points that not even are the 5 transport points that we use in Saam acupuncture nowadays. So he'll use like Zhaohai, he'll use Gao Huang Shu or something like that. Sorry, kidney 6 and bladder 43. He'll be using points that we don't actually use too much in Saam today, but apparently he found it successful. Jisan, while he does tend to use more of these liver organ supplementing or draining prescriptions, he still does go back to these prescriptions from Saam where, it's a little bit, to our modern approach, is unorthodox, but he uses these other approaches that we don't use so much today. So I think this book that we're creating, it's an academic look at these original texts. So our good friend and colleague, Yi Sang-hoon, who's also going to be at the Chautauqua doing a presentation, he's already written an English version of just the Saam portion of the text. And it's fine. It's kind of simple. It's a straight translation. But what we're doing is, like Michael was talking about, we're sort of trying to find the source material. We're trying to find out where these ideas that Saam pulled from to create this acupuncture style came from. And so, like with anything, I think this book is a really good chance for people to dive deeper into Saam acupuncture. Just like if you were to have someone learn Chinese medicine for the first time, you wouldn't give them the Huangdi Neijing, the Yale Emperor's Internal Classic, and say, here you go learn everything, right? That isn't really applicable, right? We actually have schools, we have curriculum that we can follow to learn the medicine. It would be very, very difficult for someone to just learn Chinese medicine straight from the Huangdi Neijing. So same thing with this Saam book, right? It's not something that you start with, but it's something that you should work your way up to so that you can figure out, oh, why does this make sense? Why do these points actually work the way they do? Or where do these ideas come from? And you can actually use the case studies that Ji-san wrote and use it to inform your current practice using his expertise from a couple hundred years ago and hopefully apply it to modern patients today.
This Ji-san sounds like quite a character.
He was, yeah, he was quite the character.
Can I just talk to you guys about something? What I find interesting about acupuncture and points is this idea that has become very prominent in the West of like acupuncture points having functions. Okay. And not to say that that's kind of how Saam does it, but at the same time, it does feel like they have functions. But an interesting thing with acupuncture kind of, because in the past, they would mostly focus on indications, right? When you look at more classical acupuncture texts, they tend to predominantly talk about the acupuncture point's function. Indications. But what I think people sometimes miss out is that there are actually, and people also sometimes ask when did function start happening for acupuncture points? And really, probably about the 1970s to 80s is when all the points started to get these kinds of functions like clearing lung heat or harmonizing the center, those kind of herbal functions. But what people forget is that actually you had points that had functions based on category or categorical functions, which is where I think the Saam acupuncture kinds of fits in, because their functions are based on the type of category or point they are. And those categories or points have existed since the Nanjing, whether it be the 5 phase, the front mu or back shu points as well, the iron source points. All of these types of points that have categories have associated functions. So, I mean, what do you guys think with like that? Do you guys, and I think that's when I was looking at the book on the diseases, he kind of seems to include maybe some points that you might think would be used for an indication perspective as opposed to necessarily functional perspective as we see commonly in Saam now. Do you guys just kind of, how do you approach it? Are you approaching it purely from a functional perspective or an indication perspective?
It's a great question. Thank you for bringing it up. This is, I think, important. You were saying maybe it was around the 80s where these functions really began to show up. Look, I'm not a historian, but I've talked to a bunch of people that were around in the early days of acupuncture. It seems that there was a lot of standardization going on. People were trying to figure this stuff out, especially here in the West. And I think in China as well, what my small understanding is, they were trying to quantify things and make things a little more sciencey. So being able to say this point does that, I could see how that would fit into that mindset. Certainly in school, it helps you to learn something about points and learn something about thinking about treating. Oh, this point does that. Now, the question for me has always been, just because I'm a troublesome person, I can remember being in acupuncture school and thinking, is this stuff really real? I mean, it's written in a book, but damn, anyone can write something in a book. What's actually going on here? Being able to look at like the 5-phase correspondence or the Liu Qi correspondence, where we start looking at functions, that felt like a foothold to me. And especially as I've gotten into doing Saam and thinking about the channels with their full name. It's not just the lung channel. It's the hand tie-in lung channel. Okay, when you start thinking that way, your synapses work differently because you're looking at function, you're looking at relationships. You're beginning to look at macrocosm and microcosm. And there's a thing in Korean medicine, I understand, I think it's called the sanbo, where you can look at each of the points and you can tell something about their function. based on what they are. So for example, large intestine 1, metal point on the hand metal Yang Ming channel. Metal is dry. Yang Ming is dry. It's a metal correspondence. It's the driest point in the body. You want to dry things out? Large intestine 1. So there's ways, I think, that you can look at function based on these ancient correspondences that have been around with Chinese medicine since pretty much forever. In my sense, I think there's something reliable in that. But that's just where I'm at with my exploration of acupuncture right now. Phil, I'd like to get your take on it.
Oh yeah, sure. So with Saam acupuncture, right, it's all about the categories, right? It's all about the 5 transport points and their 5-element association. And what I like to do when I teach Saam is that I like to present students with what the heart supplementing prescription looks like. So we have heart 9, we have liver 1, we have kidney 10, and we have heart 3, right? So that's all based on the mother-child relationship, right? Supplementing the mother of the element of fire, or of heart, which is fire, and then we are controlling or draining the controlling element, which is water, right? Water controls fire.
In clinic, there's no such thing as a small detail. The needle you reach for, the formula you prescribe, the moment you choose to listen just a little bit longer. Your patients place their trust in you, and you deserve to place the same trust in the tools that you use. At Blue Poppy, they hold their products to the same standard that you hold your care. Herbal formulas crafted for efficiency, needles that perform the way you expect them to, clinic essentials that arrive on time. Because when your tools are dependable, your focus stays where it belongs, on your patients. No guesswork, no compromises, just steady support behind the scenes. Blue Poppy, the choice of practitioners since 1982.
Sorry, Phil, can I just ask, and because some people might not be clear on this, are you choosing specific sides for specific points? Because you're only doing 4 needles, right? So are you doing unilateral selection of points, or can you just
Oh yeah,
explain
sure.
that,
So
please?
the points are unilateral. They're almost always unilateral. We have sort of this little hierarchy of how we determine that. Almost always we're putting the points on the opposite side of the issue, right? So if I have pain on my right shoulder, I'm going to be putting the needles on the left side, right? This is an idea of using the yin to treat the yang, the disease, the unaffected side to treat the disease side. Very old idea, and we apply it also in Saam. Now, right, everybody's issue is not always one-sided, right? It could be an internal issue. And therefore, there are some certain channels, the liver and the lung channel, we like to needle on a specific side. And if it's not that, we look at the sex of the individual. If they're male, we usually needle on the left side. If they're female, we needle on the right side. Okay. So yes, usually it's unilateral. So there's 4 needles, they're needled unilaterally usually. And then, so we look at that heart supplementing prescription, those 4 points. And then if you try to understand them or explain them in a TCM perspective, you're going nowhere, right? Because you think about those points, right? The heart supplementing prescription is increasing that double fire in the body, right? The heat of the Shaoyin and the fire of the heart. That's what you are generating more of with that prescription. And so if you look at the points, and if you have an understanding of the points on the heart channel, most of the points on the heart channel are actually designed to clear heat rather than generate more heat as a result, because not always does the channel and organ have a synergistic relationship where they're one in one, where they're both doing the same thing. So right, we look at those points on the heart channel, heart 9 and heart 3, right? We don't usually think of those points as generating fire in the body. Not really, right? We usually tend to use Jingwell points to help clear heat, clear fire, clear toxic heat in the body. And then heart 3, right? Again, it could be a point to use to be sort of being the He point. We could be using it to clear heart fire. And then, right, liver 1 and kidney 10. So what we're really tapping into the body into a different way with Saam acupuncture, right? The points aren't individual islands of function, like sort of Michael was talking about, where, this point is supposed to tonify kidney yang or something like that, right? It's more about their category and how they work together to create a prescription, create a recipe. And you were mentioning about Sambo acupuncture, right, Michael? So Sambo acupuncture was created by Kim Hong-gyong. Kim Hong-gyong was a very important individual in modern Korean medicine, where he sort of revolutionized everything back in the 80s. So he sort of really reinserted Korean traditional medicine into the mainstream. He became a very popular speaker and writer. And what he did was he sort of took Saam acupuncture and moved to the next step, right? We already have this discussion of looking at the 6 chi and the 5 elements. And what he did is let's move it to an additional layer where we're actually looking at the element of the points as well. So now we're having 3 different criteria here, 3 different elements that we could look at. So like you were talking about, Michael, we have Li1, which, large intestine, the chi is dry, which is associated with metal. And then, right, it's large intestine element is metal. And then the Jingwell points on the yang channels are also metal. So we have triple metal. So it's called a Sanfu Shui or Tianfu Shui. So it's sort of a divine point. You can almost call it the divine point in the sense that this point is so directed in it has one single direction that it's very potent, right? It's very focused on accomplishing one thing. So, and just to correct you in a sense that actually Li1 would be one of the most moistening points in the whole body.
Wait a minute.
Right.
What?
So we think about our bladder supplementing prescription, right? The 4 points we use in that, where metal is the mother of water, right? So we'd actually be using Li1, supplementing Li1 to generate more water, right? Just as how Toby's teacher said that liver 1 is the hottest point in the body, right? It's triple fire or triple wood, right? Because wood generates fire. So we're using the mother nature of wood to generate fire. Actually, even before I got into Saam, I remember they were, I think in some cancer hospitals, that they were actually using Li1 to generate fluids in the mouth, generate saliva in the mouth as sort of like a single point, right? Just to accomplish that. So it's actually a very moistening point rather than a drying point.
Okay, hang on a second. I need to recalibrate my thinking for a second. I was looking at it as all metal, all dry. It would be drying, but what you're saying is because of the 5-phase relationship, that strong metal is going to create strong water.
Yeah. So, right, we look at the bladder supplementing prescription, right? The cold water of the bladder, right? We have Li1, bladder 67, bladder 40, and stomach 36, right? So the Li1 that we're supplementing in that prescription, right, is generating that fluid, right? It's all about generating that cold water. So all that metal is helping to generate fluid in the body, or generate water in the body, you could say.
And because this is a yang, no, hang on a second. I want to run with this for a second. Because we're looking at a yang point, it's not going to generate kidney water. It's going to generate urinary bladder water. So if someone's having some issues with their urinary bladder.
Right. So one of the things that we use the bladder supplementing prescription for is helping to promote urination, right? So that's one example.
Yes.
Can you not then, from Michael's perspective, you're talking about supplementing. Could you not drain the point and have a drying effect?
Oh,
yeah.
Like
so you could do that too. So for example, I guess this is that drying? Not really, but we use in the supplementing of gallbladder prescription, we also use Li1, but we drain it, right? But this is more because metal controls wood, right? So for supplementing the gallbladder wood, we're actually draining Li1 because it's that triple metal that's going to be controlling the wood, and we want to drain that energy, that nature within the body. But yeah, maybe you could drain Li1 if you wanted to sort of get rid of moisture in a sense.
This is really interesting. I hadn't thought about it this way. I'm really glad that you caught my thinking on it. Certainly something to discuss going forward, something to look at. The idea of draining Li1 as a way of drying. I mean, this is where it gets so tricky with the 5 phases. Are we drying, or are we taking a control now off of the gallbladder? Maybe people would get angry with that. I'm not sure how to think about it at this moment, other than there's some stuff to explore.
And that's where things get kind of murky, but also very exciting at the same time, where, if we're able to produce these extremely profound effects in the clinic, with these basic 12 prescriptions for supplementing and draining, we can also sort of go back to Saam's original idea of sort of being a little bit more flexible with those points. Because, like we were saying, he doesn't always use those prescriptions. He mixes and matches a bit. So there is this idea that maybe we can move a little bit away from those 12 prescriptions to do something a little bit more targeted for a patient. And now things get a little bit unstable. Like Toby likes to say, these 12 prescriptions, they're very stable. They're very organized and structured. And if we break off from that stability, we invite a little bit of chaos to things, and we don't know exactly how it's going to necessarily function. But at the same time, it does suggest that maybe we can aim our treatments in a specific direction to meet the uniqueness of our patient.
Yeah. That thought of just using one needle to do one thing. Yes, very unstable. The beauty of the 4 needles is it's taking very basic 5-phase theory. We're turning on what we want to turn on. We're turning off. We're taking the brakes off, the control. It's actually incredibly targeted because of the synergy of those 4
Saam
needles.
is amazing, The idea that we can accomplish this with four needles, it's almost absurd, It's absurd when you think about it. And, a lot of the times when you do get frustrated with Saam, because even though it's so potent, we also run into this issue when you are having problems with the patient. And I've had this many times where you don't know what to do. You've seen Saam work wonders, but then with this patient you have in front of you, you can't figure them out, and you can't figure out what treatment you're supposed to do, and it gets really frustrating, unfortunately, but then you have to go back and sort of go back to the drawing board and figure out, what am I doing wrong? How can I reinterpret their pattern and come up with the right treatment that's actually going to provide them benefit.
And the beauty of it is there's combinations that you've tried, there's channels that you've attempted to work with, and it didn't help, which means look somewhere else. Sometimes it makes it worse. So look somewhere else.
Coming back to the book that we're working on, is that then, you see one of the earliest practitioners of Saam also doesn't get it right all the time. So it's very rare that you do find a doctor who will get a 100% success rate. And sometimes it's those patients that are difficult that you learn the most from. I mean, do you really want to work in a clinic where you can just do something and it works all the time, every time? I mean, probably if you're doing that, you're probably not seeing that many sick patients, or that very sick patients as well, So it's, that's what makes medicine both incredibly frustrating, but also, rewarding more beyond than, a lot of other jobs, for sure. I think.
One of the most exciting things about Ji-san's case studies is that he takes some really messed up patients and sometimes gets them much better, And like Michael was bringing up, this is something that you can tell from any great case study writer, is that they are willing to admit their mistakes, that they're willing to admit where they went wrong and what they did to correct that, if they were. So we can see this in the 100-something case studies I was wrote. And what's amazing, that this was written, 200 plus years ago, The art of the case study is something that's relatively recent, And the fact that someone was writing these really high quality case studies for that time period is really exciting because, right, people, they didn't have urgent care back then. They didn't have the emergency room. So those doctors, they had to see everything. So they saw all these crazy different types of conditions that we don't really get to see in our modern clinics very often. And they were able to apply acupuncture to it and, sometimes get really good results.
So when do we get to see
So I
this
think
book?
we're shooting for September. There's still some work to be done.
We just got to get a few more editing things, and I'm trying. Both Phil and I, being non-native speakers, there are elements of the case studies that we both simply are unsure of. We've had our best guess, but we need someone to kind of help us make sure that we're not making fools of ourselves, which, like you do your best, but when you're working in a foreign language, and particularly then a language that, is like 300 years older, you have to be aware that there are going to be things that you might interpret incorrectly as well. So we're hoping to get an external edit from a Chinese colleague. It's just, I'm trying to work my good friend Alan Saw into bringing it, but he is immersing himself in the Wenbing Tiaobian. Yeah, I'm trying to just say, well, when we finish editing a bit of that, let's come back and do this, because it looks pretty good. I'd say probably about 80 to 85% of it where we feel pretty confident with, but it's that last 15% where, there are just some very peculiar terms, or a little bit unsure of how to perhaps interpret the case correctly, or, what has happened. And there are also a few chapters on the Wu Yun, like the 5 movements, that I'm not familiar with that kind of thinking at all. And I'm not sure that Phil is very kind of comprehensively studied it either as well. So, there's a few things there that I feel we need to get it checked, just to make sure that we put it out and that it has the correct information. Because I know when I was working on the books that I have with Alan as well, is that I can get things, pretty okay, but unless you get your work read by a native reader, or you're doing it in modern Chinese, or you can talk to the author, it is very, very difficult to make sure that you haven't misinterpreted something in kind of the classical language. There's just something when I edit Alan's work in English, because Alan he's very good at English, but he's not quite a native, but very close to, is that I kind of read things and I'm just like, this doesn't always feel right in English, or, but I can't necessarily always explain it. And I'm sure that he has that feeling in Chinese too. He's like, even one time I was working on a case study from the Zhenjiu Dachang, or the complete compendium, and I was trying to figure it out. I was just like, I got no idea. And I go, what is it? And he goes, oh, that's a person's name. And I go, well, how did you know that? And he goes, oh, you just know that. You just read it and you know it. I'm just like, oh, man.
Yeah.
And so, I think it's very important, if people out there are thinking of translating, is to try and find someone who is a native speaker and ideally has an understanding of Chinese medicine to help ensure that your work is as free as possible from errors. Because that's really important, especially when we want people to utilize this work in clinic. That also, I think, creates a little bit of a burden that we need to make sure that we're putting out something accurate.
Well, I appreciate that, and thank you for the work you're doing, and thanks for the attention to that kind of detail, to work out the parts that I think we have it right, but not sure. It's great to get some help with that. So this sounds like a terrific book, and I'm looking forward to reading it.
It's an interesting project, because I've been trying to slow down on how much I've taken, but when Phil sent this one, I thought, this is not usually, because I'm not a Saam practitioner, but I do love, all things acupuncture, and it was a very unique perspective. So it was very cool to kind of come on and work with it and do it. And also, I don't think that I'll necessarily ever call myself a Saam practitioner, but at the same time, it doesn't mean that I won't utilize certain Saam ideas in clinic as well.
Has it changed your thinking in clinic at all? Are there ways that you're approaching things in a different perspective?
I haven't actually done any study with Toby, so I'm not, and I've only been really exposed to Saam from these books. So I'm not, I haven't, don't actually really know like the supplementing or the draining prescriptions that you guys probably implement in your clinic more. So I am perhaps using it a little bit more in the way that this book is done, is approaching it from a disease point of view and looking at the patterns that he lists from there as well and how he uses them. So I'm kind of, I've missed out on a certain perspective, but it's also changed. I approach it a little bit differently because that's what I've only been exposed to as well. So, for example, I had a patient who had rheumatoid arthritis and was having some pain in the legs. And I can't remember off the top of my head, but they had a prescription, and she had quite a lot of dampness in her. So I went and looked at like the prescription for dampness in that book that suited this patient, and I think it was something like heart 8, maybe like spleen 2, liver 1, and kidney 8, or something like that as well. So just kind of seeing that kind of perspective of about how I'm approaching it, which is, very different to perhaps how you guys approach it. But, I thought, look, we'll give it a shot and see how it goes from the book.
Mm-hmm. Well, I've certainly found that the diagnostics that go with Saam acupuncture help me to finally understand how these 4 needles work and be able to unpack that. Phil, like you, I remember, I can't say I learned it in school. I say I was exposed to it in school, that 4 needle thing. And I can remember being in clinic in some early years and thinking, oh yeah, I want to do one of those chi transfer things. And then I would be immediately confused completely. So I didn't really use it because I'd start to think about it and I'd go haywire. I just couldn't think. But having the diagnostics and an understanding of actual 5 element and, great channel correspondences, it finally came together for me. But it was that way of diagnosing that helped me to understand the needles.
Right. Yeah. Without the counterbalance pairs, you're really sort of left with almost disease prescriptions, right? Where use this prescription for cough, use this one for knee pain, et cetera, et cetera. But the counterbalance pairs, they create a system. They create a system within the body that can be manipulated to get the person back into a healthy balance. So the best example that I like to give to my patients is that I like to compare the body to a 6-string guitar, right? So you have those little knobs at the top where you have tuning pegs where you can adjust whether you want the note to go higher or lower. And what the 12 supplementing prescriptions are, they're just like that, where we're either sort of taking one of those pegs and we're either tightening it or loosening it. And our goal is to get the body in harmony, get the guitar in harmony. And what we're doing that essentially with the body.
I like that.
I like that too. I think, we were actually talking about guitarists before we started having our conversation. So that's a very apt metaphor, I think.
Yes.
And interestingly, I think, like in the older classics, they talk a little bit about the pitch pipes or something like that in the lineage. It's not something that I've really gone into, but they talk about one of these things where they talk about the 6 pitch pipes or something like that having relation to a medicine. But I've never delved into that, so I can't comment more on that. But definitely, music would play like an interesting kind of corresponding role.
Probably conversation for another day.
Yes.
Yes. Well, gentlemen, thank you. I'm excited to see your work, have a copy. I've been so curious about this since I started to practice it, and really appreciate the effort that you guys have gone to get us some of the backstory. It's great.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. It's always a pleasure to come on and chat about Chinese medicine.
Thank you for having us on. We really appreciate it.
Great. I'm sure we'll do it again. It's funny how things work out. Phil coming across a master's paper on Saam from a classmate at the Beijing school, and how Phil's time in China crisscrossed with mine. It would be years before we'd finally meet, and it would be our curiosity about Saam acupuncture that would be the catalyst. I am quite looking forward to reading this book, in part to see if I can understand the critical thinking of premodern Saam practitioners, and in part because of the history that the book goes into. When I learned Saam from Toby Daly, I was especially taken with the Saam yin-yang organ pairings. For me, it was as if various loose threads from my understanding of TCM suddenly began to tie together. Plus, in looking at the way the 5 phases and the 6 environmental chi weave together to create the character of a channel, I felt like something in my thinking fell into place. There was a symmetry in terms of physiological functioning that changed how I approached my clinical work. It was surprising in the conversation to hear that those organ pairs were not part of the tradition at the beginning. They came later. What's more, it's unclear who was the doctor who had that insight. For years now, I've been looking through the classics for a sign about how the lung and the stomach, or the gallbladder and the pericardium, balance each other out. So when Phil said that those were a more modern innovation, it made me wonder just who it was that saw those connections. And beyond that, why has this not been discussed by other doctors in the past? It seems to me that this way of pairing the channels is a hidden harmony that's been hiding for a long time now in plain sight. For sure, this is a powerful dynamic to work using the 4-needle method. But beyond that, it's a way of thinking about channel relationships that can inform your work in a broader way. Finally, I appreciate the scholarship and attention to detail that Phil and Michael have put into this work. In this age of instant, easy AI answers, they have puzzled over material and diligently worked to make sure that they had it right. That kind of attentiveness, I'm sure, will be a benefit to the reader because you're getting the distilled experience of people working out a difficult problem. I'm sure the Saamsters listening to this are excited to get their hands on the book. And if you're new to Saam, it should be a great adjunct to any of the classes that you take. And best of all, we have another addition to the Saam library for the English-speaking world.